Donna.
Hello. Well, you're John had your wife go in there for a little bit. That's how you do it. He says, okay. But no, he missed 5 days of work. I think he's for lost wages. She says, you know, I've been retired for 6 years. He was just teasing her big time. Just straight. It was funny. He did a classic John, put it that way.
Good to go?
No, not yet. I'll get there though.
What you needing?
I'm gonna get this
Mouse
mouse
stick neck?
over there.
It is over here. You have a stick neck, stiff neck?
No.
Oh, the way you was turning, looking, it looked like you was
You
turning.
had it over there for just a second.
What's on that?
That's his charts.
All at once?
Yeah. There it is. All right. All right. Take it to, bring it back a little bit this direction towards the monitor. There you go. There you go. Bring it a little farther. You see it?
No.
It's up in the far corner by the other arrow. There you go.
Well, that what he's looking for, his arrow?
Yep. See, when you, as he moves it this way, it'll go over to this monitor. And it goes from that monitor to that monitor. But when when they're to your back, and you're moving it up here, it's not quite as
Yeah,
intuitive.
the VAV, I got a monitor here and a computer over here with the monitor. And as I move it this way,
Yeah.
it'll go over to that one.
Yeah.
And when it's over there, everybody tries to move it, you gotta move it the other way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Is this not working?
Yep.
Okay.
We need to talk about what to do with that TV we took down. I put it in my office now just to get it out of the way.
Y'all decide to do it.
I mean, you're part of y'all, so.
I quit making decisions.
Oh, you did.
Yes, I did. I get in trouble.
Oh, you did. Hello, Aaron. How are you?
I mean, I told Florence, I said, she's how you doing? I said, I said, I did 5 days work. Claim on Dale for lost wages. Oh, you should have seen it.
Oh.
Should have seen the look on her face.
No,
She was getting all concerned. I said, Florence, I retired 6 years ago.
He told the story better.
My wife,
I mean, he had the straight face, and at first I
Oh,
thought,
I mean, she did.
Why would you give her a heart attack?
Well, I didn't realize she was gonna, I thought she would catch it. Donna caught it.
yeah. But he's a straight face, but I know his humor. So I go, oh, that's mean, but it was funny. It was funny.
Okay.
I have been accused of having dry humor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Joanna Cross is sick.
Joanna Cross is sick.
Yeah. So Judy and Dan won't be here tonight because they took care of Gavin and Mason all afternoon. So they're tired.
Oh, yeah.
And Gavin and Mason, they think, might be feeling a little bit bad, so they don't figure Danny will be here either because he's got to take care of Gavin and Mason. So that whole side won't be here tonight.
While you're writing, my lady's recovering
from
surgery yesterday.
that surgery. I guess it went like it's supposed to.
Yeah, it went good. It went
Oh,
good.
but it's
It's sinus surgery. She can't bend. She can't stoop.
Tommy said it was worse when he had his thyroids removed, when he had that surgery. he was miserable. You can't breathe because you're all stopped up like this before they take.
Well,
the
they
skin
didn't
out.
pack it.
They didn't?
No, they don't pack them nowadays.
Wow.
That's what Dr. said we very seldom ever pack it nowadays.
Wow.
They left it open.
Well, that would make it a little bit better because Tommy
Said
had.
it- said
Maybe
it
his was
hurt
worse than
feeling.
her. Maybe he had more stuff done, maybe, because he was really rolling.
Well, the first time she had it done, they packed it, and then when I had it done, they packed it, and he said, no, they don't. Said the only time they pack it nowadays is if they have to go in there and do a lot of work on the septum and stuff.
Yeah.
Hi Pat, how you doing tonight?
Well,
I'm doing
that would
okay.
be a little bit better for her because Tommy said it was worse when he had his thyroid removed.
She's at home,
Yeah.
Seem to be.
she's at home recovering. Hattie's what removed?
You're in button.
Don,
Your button one.
Hattie's what removed?
Thyroid removed.
Thyroid.
Thyroid, okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't understand thyroid, I could.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause of course, I'm a little hard of hearing too.
Of course, they found out about his thyroid when they're doing the scans for it to do the surgery, and then they went down lower and they showed up. That's where they saw the stuff on his thyroid, and that's where it started the whole thing. So his bad sinuses saved his life, basically.
Good.
Yeah, I think it was that way. Because they would not have
Would
found
have
that.
found the thyroid without it.
They would have found that. That's
That's all, a mistake by a technician saved you.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Because if they hadn't gone down lower than they should have, they wouldn't have seen those nodules or whatever on his thyroid. And they
Yeah.
checked them. They checked them, and it turned out they were malignant, so they had to remove it. So they removed everything.
So he doesn't have a thyroid period?
Nope. Several years old, they just took the whole thing out.
How can you get along without thyroid? Did you take medicine?
You take, yeah. Like I have my thyroid is Hashimoto, hypo, whatever. And so I take medication. Like
To slow it down?
to make it do whatever it's supposed to do. And Tommy takes this, he has none at all. And so you just take medication. Like for-
Well, don't well, okay, good. Good for medication. I mean, I think my mother had thyroid trouble. And I think I do too, really. Because they say your thyroid causes you to lose your hair.
No, the medication they use it in your hair.
Oh, well, something made me lose it.
Yeah.
And mother had thyroid problems, and I thought it was either an underactive thyroid or an overactive.
I know, I was losing a lot of weight, which was really nice. It turned out I was underactive. I like it when it's hyper. I want to go hyper than the other. Yeah, and so,
Well, you have more energy. I mean,
yeah, well, I always talk too fast.
that's okay.
You know,
I talk too slow. And I think people get tired of hearing me before I ever get through. And I don't blame them.
oh, when I first came out to Texas after California and met Tommy's folks, sweetest people. Years later, they wanted to tell me to slow down. I'm talking too fast. I said, I want to tell you, come on, pick it up, you're talking too slow.
Yeah.
They talk so slow.
Well, that's Texas for
I
you.
just say I'm from California, that's what I explained that.
Thank you,
yeah.
sir. Appreciate it.
When I went to California from Oklahoma, oh, everybody laughed at me. I said, well, hello there, how are you? You know,
Oh, yeah.
and I'd think, all right, smart aleck. Well, it's young people, you know, they are.
Yeah. Once a bunch of young people were saying about how something crazy or stupid people from California were. Because I'm from California, they just kind of looked at me. And I was the boss's wife.
No, well, they better not say anything.
Yeah, no, they well, we didn't mean it that way. No, it was fun. It was funny. I didn't take it bad. It was just funny.
Yeah. Well, I finally picked it up a little bit,
Evening, ladies.
but I never did.
Hello.
Good evening to you.
How's Isaac tonight?
Doing all right.
All right.
Yeah, I could tell a difference when I come back from California. We do talk slow, right?
Yeah. I never do slow down, I'm afraid. My very best friend who lives in Texas now, so she catches about every the word, so she kind of catches it. You know, she's known me long enough to kind of understand what I'm saying. So if I'm talking too fast, it won't hurt my feelings. Just tell me to slow down. I'm used to hearing, slow down.
Well, okay, well, my grandson don't want me to talk at all.
Hello.
He says, you repeat what you said 2 or 3 times. He said, I
Pretty
heard it
loud.
first.
Thank you. Yep.
And I said, well,
I took my grandkids
Oh.
clothes shopping.
I don't know.
I spent so much money on them, I thought I deserved something, so I
They're
said,
after him if he doesn't, they don't claim the trip, and then they're after him when he stays the trip.
well, you did.
You
You
can't
got
win
to
for
get
those.
moved.
No, no. I don't know, man.
I can't do that.
What chapter we on, John?
What you can today?
Hennepin County, Georgia. I
He's
can't,
got 32 up there, but I thought it was on like 25 or 6.
Well, he said
nine.
The last.
Last half,
It was
last part,
25.
25,
Yeah.
where I thought it was.
He
Pickle
says,
glasses.
verse
No, little
31.
I did.
Yeah,
And then I did 2.
he's got 32 up there,
Pickled okra.
and 36,
I experimented
37.
with it. I made just to see how it's gonna turn out.
He's going way off.
I made pickled okra in the past, but
I wish we was that far
it's
along.
never
So I
real,
wanted to jump into that. I
you know,
said,
Christmas morning.
Well, he's got East all being
Kids drink it
100.
still later. But anyway, I thought, well, I'm gonna
Make it
put
hasty dye
it
season.
in the lime
Yeah.
water, like I did,
yeah, that the quick bit
and see what happens. And I didn't know I couldn't put it as long, because it would ruin it. But it was been here a long time. But, I had to go to the doctor, so I thought, well,
Church your
that's
forehead.
never right for another doctor.
Yeah, bandage,
How
huh?
much
She's
it
making a
costs.
Band-Aid.
I'll see,
It's very cute.
I'll see how much, how.
Oh, I
Probably about
see the
4
back.
hours.
Looks like the bandage is down against your eyebrow.
Down to my eyebrows.
Oh, you did.
I just didn't see you then because I probably
Their hairline's up
went
here,
out
but
to,
the bandage
you
is
know,
down
do
to
the
their
Lord's Supper
eyebrows.
and everything. But I was here.
If it does,
Oh, you doing the Lord's
back
Supper
her
Sunday?
hips.
Oh, Brenda. Oh,
Yeah, well, both of us are
oh, okay.
this time. Yeah. So that's where I just came from.
Oh,
I thought, why not try it? See what happens.
Amy Lynn is here tonight. Amy Bradley is, you know, they didn't get Clementine.
Well, he's already 3 minutes late. 2
Amy
minutes
Lynn
late.
is here and she looks so cute. She has on a dress.
And you know what?
And it takes all day
Eyes
to
is
sit
gonna
up.
have
And
to
try
fill in
to
for
see her. You probably will.
Maybe just wait till I put it
What
down.
to do about my.
I think he's one
It's
so
a funny little girl, I
And
tell you.
DNT. I,
Really.
both of them didn't help me.
how old is she?
She's only 6.
Ron
today,
Jones will ring the bell.
She won't be 7 until February.
You're wheezy.
So she may do some
Ron won't pay
everything.
no attention to us.
I
They
got
do
to
it
the same
six.
thing, and then I have to make reason.
Well, some of them do.
They do what?
I don't hear
It
it.
seems like they,
Yeah.
I
you
can't hear
know,
it.
positive and think that, oh,
Oh, yeah.
especially in school.
She's
Man, I can't believe you wear that shirt again.
and her imagination. Her imagination is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Just because I
You
said.
got a nice color too, don't you?
It's just like she doesn't think about anything, or she can say anything at any time, you never know.
Baseball, basketball, wrestling.
Kids, they are,
I
they're
think we just
really.
wait on the bell now.
They're,
But actually, I
oh,
know.
yes, yes.
They'll never
Too
rain.
much TV.
I know, I shall.
That's a lot of it.
Get the bell ring.
Yeah, she was talking about dinosaurs tonight.
Just a little bit.
She was also singing a song.
When you're not a little pie and have
We are.
So that was good.
something, put it up, and still
That's good, yes.
No, you
Sure
just lean over.
Wow.
She said,
It works good.
and it sucks it out and goes out the other side.
That's a neti pop. It works.
Okay.
I have one.
And she said,
For my sinuses.
Even if I didn't want lost weight.
Even though the bell hadn't rung, it's time to start. So we're in Genesis 25th chapter. We're going to begin at verse. Well, we'll begin at actually verse 31 is where we want, but we'll begin reading at verse 27 down through 31 to take us where we want to, the part we wanted to discuss. And Don't have any announcements specifically. I did get an email from Marcia today. She says she's doing pretty well, but she has a lot of fatigue from the chemotherapy. And other than that, though, she's doing pretty well. Said that she did get a card from Retha, which was nice. Joanna Cross is not feeling well tonight, and that's the only ones I know. So let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so much for this day and for the many blessings that You've given us, especially the spiritual blessings, the promise of everlasting life if we'll be faithful to Thee. We're thankful, Father, for the encouragement that we can bring to each other. We're thankful for the moisture that we've been receiving. We're thankful for this time that we can gather together to study Thy Word without fear of persecution. We're thankful for Your Son, who loved us enough to die upon the cross that we might have everlasting life if we'll be faithful to Thee. And we ask, Father, that You be with our numbers who are physically ill, that they might be restored to their health. And we have many members who, due to age and poor health, are not able to serve You as they once did. We ask that You would comfort them, and we ask that You would use us as instruments that we might reach out and help in any way that we can. As we go through this night, Father, we ask that You would be with each one of us as we continue our study in the book of Genesis, that we might have a full understanding of those things that You want us to know. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen. All right, Isaac, why don't we begin with you tonight, and if you'll start and read verses 27 through 31.
So the boys drew, and Esau was a skillful hunter and a man of the field, but Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now Jacob cooked his stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please feed me with the same red stew, for I am weary." Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright as of this day."
Okay. First off, in your handout is page 61, capital letter L, is where we're looking at. A life-changing deal was offered to him by Jacob. This is Jacob offering Esau. It says, "Sell me your birthright as of this day." So it would seem as though they had this discussion before. Don't know that for sure, but perhaps Esau had made some derogatory remark about his birthright's value, or had even spoken about his own readiness to part with the privilege. At the very least, though, Jacob had long been thinking of a way to obtain this birthright. He is often seen in a poor light, seen as one who is conniving to take something that did not rightly belong to him. For the blame should be squarely placed on Esau, though, because of Esau's attitude here. The birthright, and we've discussed this before, was the double portion of inheritance. Many commentators see it as one and the same as the blessing. Though it seems that this passage, coupled with chapter 27, as we'll see a little bit later, clearly distinguishes between the two, between birthright and between the blessing. The birthright concerns the physical inheritance. The blessing concerns the spiritual inheritance. Turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 5 and look at verses 1 and 2. Ron, when you get to there, if you would read that for us, please. Yeah, 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 1 and 2.
Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, he was indeed the firstborn, but because he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that the genealogy is not listed according to the birthright. Yet Judah prevailed over his brothers, and from him came a ruler, although the birthright was Joseph's.
Okay. And all that's suggesting is that the birthright is physical, but the blessing concerns a spiritual inheritance. And obviously the firstborn did not get that spiritual inheritance there. It may be significant, though, that birthright is an anagram of blessing in the Hebrew. The subject of chapters 26 and 27, as we'll see later, and a key theme in the book of Genesis. What Esau is prepared to forfeit will pay the way to his greater loss, and that is the loss of his blessing in chapter 27 that we'll look at a little bit later. Any comments through verse 31? All right, look at verses 32 and let's read 32 through 34. Stephanie?
And Esau said, Look, I am about to die, so what is this birthright to me? Then Jacob said, Swear to me as of this day. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright.
Okay, that phrase, I am about to die, as I mentioned to you last week, there are some commentaries that suggest that Esau suffered from diabetes. And diabetes, if it's severe enough, a person could die if they do not properly control it. But it is unlikely that another hour without food would have led to his death. Esau is hardly such a big baby, sturdy hunter that he was, and that's important to remember that he was a hunter, and so he was a sturdy individual. He should have been able to wait long enough to prepare his own food. Further, his continued talking shows how far from death he is. Because if he was just about to die, he probably wouldn't be as coherent. He wouldn't be making the statements that he is making. I'm suggesting here. But some have instead sought to interpret this as more of a statement. And that is, the statement is, I'm going to die eventually anyway. Okay? In addition, though, to assigning Esau more philosophical insight that is due him, it still leaves Esau with the same problem. And that is that he is wrapped up in the sensual enjoyment of the present and the tangible, not thinking so much of the future. Okay? Any comments on verse 32? Yes, Pat?
I'm just wondering why he doesn't go to his mother and father for some food if he's all that hungry, instead of thinking that he would sell his birthright. I know they were in famine, but they all had food. Did they live a long ways from him? That didn't make sense because he sent him out to hunt.
Yeah. His father sent him out to hunt to get some meat to make a stew for him and everything. So I don't know exactly how far they were from his father at this point. The idea, though, is that Esau took his birthright lightly at this point and was thinking more of the present. And maybe in his mind, and again, I'm just suggesting that this might be that Esau never dreamed that he would actually have to give up his birthright for the stew. But Jacob obviously had another plan. So that's what brings us to verses 33 and 34. You see, Esau sold and he despised his birthright for a measly bowl of pottage. Jacob, on the other hand, capitalizes on this opportunity by sealing it with an oath. This phrase effectively bookends Jacob's life in, let me see if I had that up here. I may not have it up here. No, I don't. In Genesis, the 47th chapter and verse 31. Genesis 47 and verse 31 says, Then he said, Swear to me, and he swore to him. So Israel bowed himself on the head of the bed. Okay, this of course is Joseph promises to bury Jacob in Canaan, and so this kind of bookends Jacob's life, if you will. Its use, though, is far different in each occasion. What we see in Genesis 47 verse 31 and what we see here in Genesis 25. In the first, Jacob is in control. You see, he is master of the situation in this situation when he says to Esau, sell me your birthright. He will dictate the terms. But in the second, Jacob is a helpless elderly man totally dependent on the will of somebody else to expedite his last wish. And his last wish was what? In Genesis 47, verse 31.
To be buried there.
To be buried where?
Not to be buried in Egypt.
Not to be buried in Egypt. And so he was dependent upon somebody else. So after filling his belly, Esau walked away unconcerned. Thus, Esau begins to show himself to be a person who is concerned with the temporary and fleeting rather than the eternal. The frivolity with which he sold his birthright to his brother for a dish of lentils rendered him unfit to be the heir and possessor of the promised grace. So it says then, in the last part of verse 34, thus Esau despised his birthright. This statement is the key to understanding Esau as the culprit rather than Jacob. Okay? Jacob did not steal Esau's birthright. Esau despised it and was quick to part with it for a bowl of stew. He despised his birthright by giving up its temporal and spiritual blessings for the gratification of his appetite. Look at Hebrews, the 12th chapter, and verses 15 through 17. Debbie, you had that?
See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. That no one is sexually immoral or unholy like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal.
Thus we have this statement, Esau despised his birthright. So to disregard spiritual privileges and blessings and treat them as less valuable than personal gratifications is a great sin. It is viewed by God as profane and exposes the soul to the loss of His favor. Are you still there at Hebrews 12, Debbie? Read verse 17 again.
For you know that afterward, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no chance to repent, though he sought it with tears.
And so Esau despised his birthright. Any comments through verse 34? Any comments on chapter 25?
We need to apply that to ourselves. We can forfeit our birthright.
Yes, we can.
Through denying our Lord in some way or in some form or another.
Exactly
It's
right.
the same thing.
Yeah, that's very true. Any other comments? All right, let's look at chapter 26 then. And in your handout is page 62. Isaac moves 3 times. We're going to see in this chapter. And the title of Genesis 26, Victor Eskew gave 4 possible titles here. A famine, a promise, and many wells, famine and fountains of water. Isaac, a lie, a promise, and wells of water. And D, Isaac moves 3 times. Genesis 26:1, verse 17, and verse 23. The key verse that he lists here is Genesis 26, verses 3 and 4. And the reason being is God renews the land promise and the seed promise to Isaac. The Messiah would now come through Abraham, through Isaac, and God now speaks to Isaac as the family head. Okay? So the lessons of Genesis 26, cap letter A, looks at Genesis 26, verse 1. But although Isaac is a man of strong faith, he is not the prominent, aggressive man whose faith demands attention as the way Abraham's did. With Abraham, there were many distinct advances that were made in God's covenant relationship with man. Separation from the wicked. You remember, God told Abraham to get away from Haran, move to a land that I will tell you later on. Relocation to the promised land. Making of the covenant and reception of the covenant sign. Isaac, though, kept the faith and stayed true to the covenant. But he did little else. Thus, little needed to be said of Isaac. So this chapter contains the only scenes in the Bible where Isaac is the chief character. And even here, he only offers echoes of his father's life. This chapter speaks of the influence of the father on his son and the meekness of Isaac's character. So let's look at verses 1 and 2 of Genesis chapter 26. John, if you would read that for me, please.
And there was a famine in the land, beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto
Gerar.
And the Lord appeared unto him and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of.
Okay, so many problems of the patriarchs and the Israelites to whom this was written stem from a lack of food. More accurately, a lack of faith in the one who provided the food. When this happened, we cannot tell as far as the time. It appears, though, that it appears to have been after the death of Abraham concerning the first famine back in Genesis 12 verse 10. We can go back there and look at that. I don't think I put it up there. But back in Genesis 12 verse 10, we read, Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. And we'll see throughout Genesis here that there were various famines. So this was a problem, but it was a lack of faith because they did not trust enough in God to provide for them, even though God said that He would take care of them. Approximately 80 years has passed, though, since the last encounter with Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And you see this name here in verse 1, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. So approximately 80 years have passed. So either he was a very young king in Abraham's day, or Abimelech is a throne name for the Philistine kings as Pharaoh was for the Egyptian monarchs. Don't know which it might be. It's not important as far as this point is concerned. What is important, though, is that famine compelled Isaac to leave Canaan. God, however, intervened, ensuring that Isaac would stay in the promised land and not rely on the strength of Egypt. Any comments through verse 2? All right, look at verses 3 through 5 now. Pat, you want to read that for me, please?
Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you, for you and your descendants I give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give to your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. That it?
Be first 5.
Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, and my statutes, and my laws.
Okay. So, as I have up there, God renews the land promise and the seed promise to Isaac. In your handout, this would be, let's see here. It'd actually be, well, B, C, D, E, and F. Okay? We're kind of jumping through as Victor's comments here. But this instance of divine promise is filled with first. All right, I want you to think about this for a moment. First off, the promises are affirmed to Isaac for the first time. And this is the first instance of the specific promise of God's abiding presence with the patriarchs. Previously, the promise of the land had been solely made to the offspring of Abraham. But here, for the first time, the promise includes this patriarch. Okay? All these lands, verses 3 and 4, contrast with the term land in, go back and look at verse 1. Verse 1 says, there was a famine in the land. Verse 2 says, then the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt, live in the land. Verse 3 says, dwell in this land. You look at verse 12, and verse 12 says, then Isaac sowed in that land. And verse 22 says, and he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it, so he called his name Rehoboth, because he said, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. But now go back and look at verse 3 and 4. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you, for to you and your descendants I give all these lands. Okay? Plural. So lands must include those areas possessed by any number of different neighboring groups. Abraham's faith may have wavered at times as he made his share of mistakes. Okay? Yet he always obeyed the commands of God. Yes, John?
You said just a minute ago this is the first time Isaac was mentioned in the promise.
No. I said that this is the first time the patriarchs are listed. Okay? Up to this time, it was just solely the promise of the land had been solely made to the offspring of Abraham. Okay? But here, for the first time, the promise includes the patriarchs as well. That's what I'm saying. Okay? Good question. All right, so Abraham always obeyed the commands of God. Isaac is told that these blessings have come upon him because of his father's obedience, carrying with it the clear implication that continued blessing is contingent upon his continued obedience. So God makes the covenant conditional on the obedience of the covenant recipient. Although the covenant is carried out solely by God's grace, it also requires man's participation. And God has always expected man to participate in this. He desires all man to be saved, but He's not going to save man unless man does something. So it is not insignificant that Abraham was not under a system of law. Everything he was and everything he had was due solely to the grace of God. Even when there was no written law, God's grace required man's obedience. Look at verse 6 of Genesis 26 now. Maxine, you want to read that for me, please?
And Isaac dwelt in Gerar.
Okay, kind of short, wasn't it? So now, why don't you read verse 7 also?
And the men of the place asked him of his wife. And he said, she is my sister, for he feared to say, she is my wife. Lest, said he, the man of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon.
Okay. Well, where have you heard that before? Like father, like son, huh? Now, your version says she is fair to look upon, but many versions, I know the New King James Version says she is beautiful. Okay? Yes, John?
And Isaac is at least 75 years old.
Yes. Yes. So, what we do see here in verse 6 is Isaac obeys God. He obeyed God's command and did not go down to Egypt. So in faith, Isaac now remains. And just as Abraham, Isaac meets the conditions of the blessing. In verse 7, though, and I need to put it up here, fear is often the driving force behind lies. Even today, oftentimes we might lie. Sometimes we might think of it as a little white lie, but a lie is a lie if we think that it's going to keep us out of trouble. So a lie is a judgment on another's character, even if it is not as clearly deliberated as this was. The beauty of his wife and the fear of his neighbors showed a lack of Isaac's faith here. That is, he would follow in his father's steps in this regard is most puzzling. Surely Isaac must have known how the matter turned out in the case of his father. But then sin is never logical, is it? Any comments through verse 7? Yes, John.
Abraham did it twice,
Abraham did it twice. Exactly right.
but in both cases they were actually sisters,
Yes.
along with being wives.
Yes. Yes.
It is that part of the truth off.
Yes. Is a half-truth. All right. Let's look at verses 9 through 11 then. Florence, you want to read that for me, please?
Leave out 8.
Do what?
Leave out 8.
Yes, I'm going to skip 8. We can't look at every verse. We'd be here forever.
Okay. Then Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Quite obviously she is your wife, so how could you say she is my sister?" Isaac said to him, "Because I said, lest I die on account of her." And Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might soon have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us." So Abimelech charged all his people, saying, "He who touches this man for his wife shall surely be put to death."
Okay. So obviously Abimelech understood some things about marriage. He understood some things about adultery, and he understood some things about sin. There were liberties taken and freedom used on the occasion which were not lawful but between man and wife. Therefore, this pagan king rebuked the forefather of God's chosen people. Abimelech shows himself to be more righteous than Isaac had judged him to be. He understands the solidarity of a group. One person's action affects the whole community. Notice what he said there again. From Abimelech's perspective, Isaac endangered an entire nation by his effort to protect himself from danger. Abimelech then seeks to make sure his people know that this woman is not to be touched. And it seems that he wants his people to be as morally upright as he is. Death was the punishment of adultery among the Canaanites, among the Philistines, and among the Hebrews. Go to Genesis chapter 38 and look at verse 24. Donna?
And it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry." So Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned."
Okay. Bring her out and let her be burned. Any comments through verse 11?
Let her be stoned.
Here's an interesting thing about it. Abimelech was not a God-fearing individual like Abraham and Isaac, but he was a moral, upstanding individual, and he knew this was wrong. And he knew that it could destroy a whole nation. Yes, John?
He didn't only tell him not to be touching the wife, but he told him to stay away from Isaac also.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't make her a widow.
That's right. Don't do like David did and make Bathsheba.
Now, leaving him out of it.
I told you once before the reason she is named Bathsheba is because she likes to take lots of baths. All right. Yeah. Let's look at verses 12 through 14. Karen, you want to read verses 12 through 14 for me, please?
And Isaac sowed in that land and found in the same year 100-fold. And Jehovah blessed him. And the man waxed great and grew more and more until he became very great. And he had possession of flocks and possessions of herds and a great household, and the Philistines envied him.
All right, in your handout on page 63, it's capital letter J and capital letter K. All right? So, God can bless a man with physical abundance here. Isaac did some farming, which is not recorded of Abraham. His harvest is greater than ever in very fertile regions, of which normally yields only about 25 to 50-fold. This bounty then is to be contrasted with a famine in Canaan that precipitated the whole affair. A wasteland is only a few miles away, but here is Isaac harvesting a bountiful crop. And it confirms that the Lord is indeed looking after Isaac. No camels or donkeys are listed with Isaac's wealth, as they were in describing Abraham's wealth. It is unclear whether he no longer had need of these animals, or if they are omitted for another reason. Any comments through
Still
4?
moving, so he still had need for them.
Still had need.
Because they carried the supplies and stuff.
Yeah, but maybe not moving the distance that Abraham and his entourage moved. That's a possibility. Yes, Pat?
I think K sounds, it's different, because it says great blessings to one can bring out envy in the part of others. For Isaac, in parentheses, had possession of flocks and possession of herds, and great store of servants.
Yeah, in verse 14.
Envied him, that K.
Yeah, it says, for he had possessions of flocks and possessions of herds and a great number of servants, so the Philistines envied him. So obviously he did have some flocks and everything, unlike what we might take from verses, the first few verses. Yes, John.
What do you call a large group of camels?
A large group of camels?
I'm saying, would it be a herd or a flock?
No, that's a good question. And it's, well, a lot, yeah, but I remember, I'll look that up again. I remember it's different than a herd or a flock.
Well, maybe it could have
dromedary, but I don't know.
Could have been included in the flocks and herds.
It could have been, yeah.
I don't know what you
Yeah, so I'll look that up again because that's a good question. Caravan.
No, that's in a long line of traveling.
Yeah, that's a long line of travelers.
Also a caravan.
I'll look it up, John.
She just looked it up.
Yeah.
And you're sure it's a caravan?
That's what it says.
It says, according to Ask.com, a group of camels is referred to as a caravan,
Okay.
a flock, train, or a herd.
Oh, so a flock is included in there then.
Flock and herd and both average camels.
All right. So a flock is included in that.
Camels
So,
were included.
so camels were probably included in this. All right. Good question and good research there. All right. Look at verses 16 through 17. Let's see. Karen, you read that, didn't you?
I just read before, yeah. Oh, you want me to read again?
No, you read 12 through 14, didn't you?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Yeah, Isaac, we're back up to you.
All right, 16 and 17.
16 and 17. Yes, please.
And Amalek said to Isaac, go away from us, for you are much mightier than we. And Isaac departed from there and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there.
Okay. Now, in your handout, this would be part of capital letter K. Yeah, it looks like about number 3.
Wasn't he already at Gerar?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
departed and left and settled in Gerar?
Yeah, but how big this was, I don't know. But it becomes apparent that Abimelech was not behind the stopping of Isaac well, unless he is lying. And I say that because, look at verse 15. Now the Philistines had stopped up all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, and they had filled them with earth. And Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, for you are much mightier than we. Now you look down at verse 29, though, and it says, that you will do us no harm, since we have not touched you, and since we have done nothing to you but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord. So that statement there in verse 29 would suggest that the Philistines were not behind the covering of these wells. Okay?
Philistine government.
Do what?
The Philistine government.
Okay, the Philistine government.
Because their shepherds are the ones that was doing it.
Well, yeah, it's probably the KKK or, some of those white supremacists. So, Abimelech then he was not stopping his people from doing it, though, which is what John is bringing out here, a point which Isaac certainly could have called him on, okay? But Abimelech was apparently moral enough to command his people not to touch Rebekah, but allowed them to touch Isaac's wells to his detriment. Fueled by envy and fear, the king turned a blind eye to the actions of his citizens in order to expedite Isaac's departure. Any comments through verse 17? Yes, Maxine.
In regard, now 6 says he's already in Gerar.
Yes, so Isaac dwelt in Gerar?
Departed and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar.
Yeah, the valley. One is Gerar, the one is the valley.
Okay.
Ron, you had a comment?
Well, verse 15 says the Philistines had stopped up all the wells and filled them with earth.
Yeah, what I'm saying is Abimelech himself was not behind the stopping of the Isaac's wells. But he turned a blind eye to his people, the Philistines, and they did it. I probably didn't make that as clear as I should have. Any other comments? All right, look at verses 18 through 22. Ron, if you'd read that for me, please.
Then Isaac dug again the wells of water which they had dug in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. He called them by their names which his father had called them. Also Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of running water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the name of the well Esek, because they quarreled with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also. So they called its name Sanah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, because he said, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land."
Okay. So, moves will sometimes involve struggles with some who have been long-term residents, as we're seeing here in these verses. Although Isaac was meek and left at the word of the king, trouble continued to follow him. And after leaving, Isaac redug his father's wells and dug new wells, but the locals claimed those wells as their own. So Isaac had left the Philistine land as he was asked, and certainly would not dig in a place that he knew would cause strife. Therefore, it seems that these people followed him for the express cause of stirring up trouble. And Isaac and his people dug all the wells under debate, giving them the same names Abraham gave, indicating that they are his. Isaac gives up what is his, and he continues to move on. But the Philistines continue to follow him there also, and they quarrel over that well as well. So rather turning his manpower on this group of bandits, Isaac continues to move again. And apparently this time he moved so far that they could not possibly claim the wells that Isaac dug. Yes, John?
Back when we studied about Hagar, you said that the wells were covered and somewhat hidden. What difference does it make what Isaac called them that they're not marked with a name flag?
Well, I mean, he just calling them same names that his father gave them.
But the Philistines ain't going to call them that name. They're
No.
gonna call them whatever they want to when they get to it.
Right. All the Philistines doing is taking over the wells, controlling them and everything. So, it's just, I mean, in the scriptures here, it just tells us what the names of these wells were to give us an idea that they indeed were Abraham's wells. And that's the purpose of it, so we know that they were his father's wells. But the Philistines are laying claim to them, which is probably just causing nothing but trouble. They probably didn't need the wells, but you know, maybe because of everything taking place, they wanted Isaac completely out of the area.
They're probably just upset because whatever his name is,
Abimelech.
let them mess with it.
That may be true too. So, what we see here is the influence of Abraham on his son is clearly seen. Through this time, his influence is, or though this time, I should say, his influence is for good. Because Isaac is aware of the promises involved in the covenant, including that of numerous descendants this statement that we see in verse 22 again, and he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, because he said, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. So this statement here in verse 22 shows full faith in God's well-being and His will being done in this life. It is no accident, though, that it is on the heels of this display of faith that God reaffirms His continued presence, specifically confirming that aspect of the promise. Now, that's our last bell, but I'll show you this map. And this is where Gerar is located. Here's Hebron, here's Beersheba, and here's Gerar, Edom and Moab and Ammon in this area here. So that just gives you an idea of where the location is here. Okay? So it goes from Beersheba to Gerar. All right, so.
It went back to Beersheba.
Yes. And then went back. So we'll take up with verse 24 next week.